Well, it depends on who that candidate is. At the beginning of June, the Biden-Harris campaign had around $92 million on hand. They raised another $127 million during June, but we don't know yet how much they spent last month. And because they're registered with the Federal Election Commission under both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, if she were to replace him, that money could transfer with no issue. But if this hypothetical situation involves someone else, it gets a little tricky. In multiple interviews, the Campaign Legal Center has said a different candidate could not access that money directly. The campaign would either have to transfer that money to the Democratic National Committee or create a political action committee. If they created a PAC, it would not be allowed to coordinate with a new candidate, and both the DNC and the PAC would only be able to donate a few $1,000s directly to a new candidate's campaign. The other option would be to refund donors who would then, they would hope, donate again to the new candidate. That could be a messy process. If you have a good question, just email us. Goodquestion@WKYT.com. I'll see you on WKYT Mornings.